And what they said was basically like, if you continue to do this, your testosterone will continue to go down and your cortisol will continue to go up. You need to look at how you're training to maximize your potential. You need to, basically what they were saying was you need to train smarter, not harder. You know, as I've grown older and have had to deal with the outcome of I think I'm at like 17 years now of doing CrossFit style workouts, or CrossFit only for a long period of time, is that it takes a toll on your body if you are doing that 6 days a week or 5 days a week. And what I've come to appreciate more is one of the things that they state in the level 1, which they said, hey, if we find a program that is better, and the example that was always used when I was, on staff was, if it means balancing on a Bosu ball and doing hula hoops while shaking the shake weight, and that shit works, and it proves in the CrossFit games that it produces better athletes, we'll adopt that, and you'll see it in the daily WOD. You'll see it in the CrossFit.com programming. And unfortunately, I don't think that they ever really implemented that. Jason, you agree?
Yeah, I think in theory. So I agree with you. And we used to always use who's the fittest man on earth? The guy who set like the triathlon. Remember the great?
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah.
It'll come to me. But we used him as an analogy, right? Where he had great skills, these long, slow distance training, but lacked it over here. And but I generally agree with you. I mean, I think that was always the premise that Greg had. And that CrossFit had was that, hey, show us a more effective program and we will adopt it. That was always the premise. But to your point, I don't know if that's been incorporated as much. I don't think from a methodology perspective, things have changed much in the last, 20 years. Exactly
what my point is. So if you look back, starting I would say in about 2012 to 2013, I think 2013 specifically, I think we learned a lot about program design specifically for CrossFit athletes that improved performance and outcome at the end of the CrossFit Games that was never adopted. And the big example of one of those elements is endurance training, and specifically, the stuff that you learned and I learned from Chris Hinshaw in 2013, that, dude, I mean, when I saw the improvements that you were getting, not only in running, but in the stuff that you, Miranda, Neil Maddox, Garrett were all doing, and you in particular, you and Garrett, your improvements over everyone else was at a rate of return that was unmatched by any other competitor. So when I saw that, I reached out to you and I was like, all right, so how is this happening? Because I can see this from afar that you were improving faster than everyone else. And you introduced me to Chris. And for the next bunch of years, I trained with Chris's program, which is submaximal aerobic conditioning, that created this base that not only allowed you to perform better in aerobic events or training sessions, but also it allowed you to be better in strength workouts after another workout, or it allowed you to recover better in shorter periods of time. It improved your oxygen uptake in your muscle tissues for longer CrossFit conditioning workouts. And I think that from what I've observed, that goes against high intensity. How we define high intensity, where it's like, and the argument could be made, well, the most programmed workout on CrossFit.com is the 5K run, right? But what is the goal of intensity? It's to decrease the time to completion in order to increase intensity or increase power output. And what that drives every athlete to do in an affiliate setting or in a training setting, and you guys see the same athletes day in and day out doing the same stuff that I do, which is they push that to their maximum to get that intensity. And what happens is, and this happened to me in those early years of training with Chris, was I would push well beyond my aerobic threshold, well beyond my lactate threshold, and turn this into like what would be like a zone 4 workout, which is missing the intention of creating aerobic base. Now, making full circle, Jason, I think you got second place in 2013.
I did. Yeah.
Yeah. Rich Froning, another guy that, I mean, obviously won 2013, that trained with Chris. Camille, another person that trained with Chris, took first place.
Yeah. Garrett, I think, took fifth that year, I think.
Right. So you could just go person to person to person. And if you look at the podium of the last 10 years of the CrossFit Games, there's one common element that those people have that I don't see with the other athletes. Can the other athletes still end up on the podium? Absolutely. Programming dependent. But in reality, these athletes that have these huge metabolic engines, specifically in anaerobic capacities, they do really, really well for a lot of the events, but then they bomb so many that they cannot be on that podium. So that had me thinking for a long time, like, okay, cool. So this aerobic training is so important to ending up with a better performance in the CrossFit Games. What will it do with the average person that thinks that CrossFit.com should just be mixed modality, high intensity training and Olympic weightlifting and powerlifting style movements, and they're leaving out that stuff? And inevitably, and I will speak for myself personally, because I am not as educated as somebody like Peter Attia or Huberman. I am a guy that swings a Halligan at work and likes playing with barbells. When I started addressing, let me back it up. Training with my definition and CrossFit's definition of CrossFit created an aerobic deficiency that I could not overcome. So it became wholly obvious to me when I participated in an endurance event and I went beyond my aerobic threshold for a long period of time. And then my body just said, click into that anaerobic area that you're good at. So I would have to go and then stop, go and then stop, go and then stop until I could recover. And it was this huge hole in my fitness that I never realized was there because CrossFit programming doesn't expose it.
Dude, is some of the hesitation of making this or revisiting the model the fact that you can't fit this into like a 60-minute class? Is it
absolutely
is that kind of a part of it? Is that it?
It's off brand. You can't fit it in the affiliate setting. It may require you to go out to a track. I mean, there's so many reasons why you can't implement it in your standard box. I understand that part of it, but I think people need to be aware of the consequences of training anaerobically only, or for 90% of what you do, and that needs that understanding of like, okay, if I train like this for a long period of time, my body is going to bias creating energy through anaerobic glycolysis. And what that means is when you train that longer and longer, your body becomes more efficient at that and it loses capacity in aerobic activities. And you just need to match that up with your priorities. So to me, I started thinking, okay, where do I want to be at the end of my career? Do I want to be doing CrossFit in a gym? Or do I want to be going on, these long adventures with my wife, Cherie, or friends? Do I want to go on these long hunts with a heavy pack and be able to sustain that for a long period of time? And when I match that up, the CrossFit's definition that includes high intensity, which means power output, does not match up with my priorities. So I've had to add in 2 to 3 days a week of aerobic training specifically. And I think that's where, in my eyes, those two things don't match up. Does that mean that I don't understand why they do it? No, I get it. Their brand is high intensity and it's a very effective brand and it does create very high levels of fitness. It's not the whole fitness that we preach it, that it was.
Yeah. you said that CrossFit was an incomplete program. And the way you described it now, what I'm gathering from it has really hit home for me as of recently with what Gabe is interested in. So Gabe is studying Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he's studying old school bodybuilding. And he's actually he has a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger on his wall somewhere. But anyways, watch. He's gonna pull out the book. There it is. And
awesome.
So Gabe is really interested, and he programs our Flex Track, which is more like a functional bodybuilding. And I've been doing a little bit more of that as well. And what's been really unique for me incorporating into the flex training, and it kind of goes exactly what you're talking about, is that the goal of our flex training is like connecting the brain with the body, isolating a specific movement pattern or muscle group, and really trying to like winning is like isolation, pump, and like expressing the movement at its full potential. That's winning. Versus winning, which is like in CrossFit idea, it's like work capacity. It's moving as fast as you can. And it's been difficult for me to go back and forth. So this morning I was doing some bodybuilding, and I want to start, kind of kipping. I want to do all those things because I'm used to just like get it done as fast as possible. And I think what you're bringing up is that when you add in this layer of constantly varied functional movements at a high intensity, I believe gives phenomenal results to most people. Most of the time, it's the quickest way to get great. But I appreciate your expression of it where you're saying, hey, like it can't always be that way. Otherwise it's incomplete in this theory. It's kind of like saying, like, for me, because I never exposed myself to this isolation of bodybuilding, I haven't been able to express that as well because it's not a full complete package is I guess the point I'm trying to make from a bodybuilding perspective. Same thing with the aerobic side. So I appreciate that take, man. I actually agree with you. I thought that was I hadn't looked at it the way you just said it. Obviously Chris Hinshaw came in and really changed the game for me. And for the record, good, bad, or indifferent, I always was under the premise that I would introduce him to anybody, and anybody who asked me, I would introduce him to. And was that good for me long term? I don't know, but it was good for the sport. So I always introduced him to people. But maybe Rich beat me that year because of the intro. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, and he's worked with, like I said, the champions, right? He's worked with Camille, he's worked with you, he's worked with Rich, he's Frazier, Jeff Adler. Like it's just a list of who's who. So like, I don't think there's any denying that that's what's missing out of most of their programs. And you guys can picture any number of athletes that are gonna crush the barbell workouts where it's like the ladders. That's super exciting. And I understand why people get so hyped up about that stuff, because fucking running is boring as hell.
Right.
Like you're running around in a circle or running around on a assault runner. It's not sexy. And unfortunately, it's probably the thing that most people need the most. In order to improve, but also like Jay, I really want to like drive home that thing where it's like match up what you want your life to look like and what you want to be capable of with what your exercise program is, because most of the people that are in exercise are in it for a specific reason, and it could be something like what you're saying is, hey, I want to take off my shirt and not be ashamed when I go to the pool, right? That's a big thing for a lot of people. And if that's the case, adding in 20 minutes of functional bodybuilding or, Arnold's program or some sort of isolation exercise, like where you connect your muscle tissue with the movement and get that big pump, you can do that without beating up your body with a second fucking CrossFit workout. But what people do is they say, all right, well, if that's effective, I just need more of it. And frankly, I think what ends up happening is you end up in this negative feedback loop where, okay, if I do more of this, I'm going to lose a little bit of weight and I'm going to put on some muscle. But in reality, you end up overtrained and there's this high demand for carbs in your body because it's all anaerobic glycolysis that makes you put on body weight. So like, it's a tender balance. And the thing that I think works the best is CrossFit is very effective. You and I know this. Daily accessory work, very, very, very effective at increasing volume without beating up the body. And then 2 to 3 days of aerobic work per week and match that up with your goals.
Dude,
It's funny how so much of this just comes with age, in that as you're more susceptible to feeling beat up, you kind of have to find these things on your own. I would have heard all this. Like, I would have listened to this podcast as a 20-year-old and I would have been like, yeah, that all makes sense, but it doesn't really apply to me.
Right.
So like,
Right.
like so much of this, just like with age, with a couple of injuries, people kind of have to get there on their own a little bit, which is unfortunate because I wish that, before I hurt my back really bad, I had like heard this and been like, yeah, that makes total sense. But dude, I hook, line, and sinker believe that if this much volume is giving me this much results, obviously 2x volume will give me 2x the rate of results. Like, obviously there was no doubt in my mind that was the case. Yeah. But yeah, it's like many things with fitness and nutrition. I think people have to kind of get to that on their own, however that looks like. Although I wish we could just kind of like, it's so important,
Yeah. I think you brought up a really good point though. I just want to make sure we like circle this, that like it is goal dependent, and your goals, I wouldn't say they're like dramatically different than mine, Matt. Like we have very similar goals. I think you do more backcountry type stuff than obviously I do, but like you want to be able to express your fitness for long time domains regularly for the rest of your life. Like that's, if I'm like summarizing your goals, like for me, my goals are a little bit more anaerobic in terms of like, I want to look the part, I want to act the part, I want to be able to keep up with my kids, but I also want to be able to express it at those longer ranges, but just maybe not as much of a priority. So my training is probably a little bit more skewed this way. Like we're talking 20%, and yours might be 20% this way. But I think the key there is like aligning your expectations and where you want to go with the training style that you're going to be implementing, and then adjusting it for seasons in your life.
Matt, since you're keeping such close track of your blood work and stuff, have you noticed or had any problem with hormones, just given the fact that like, losing weight, big stressor, all this training, big stressor, like all of that stuff kind of going on? Is that something you're at all kind of concerned about or looking at, or is everything still looking pretty good?
Well, back in the day, like 2017, when I started seeing kind of like the doctor that you were seeing, Jason, where you said they drew blood and then they also recommended peptides. That's how I was introduced to that stuff. This naturopath doctor was like, here's what your blood work looks like. And it was a very inclusive panel that included like over 50 blood markers. And they were like, your testosterone is extremely low for your age. I think I was at like 305 and for a total. And your cortisol levels are extremely high. And I don't remember what those numbers were. And they started asking questions. These are people who were not familiar with CrossFit or CrossFit methodology stuff. And they started asking questions about how I train. And I would tell them, like, all right, look, most days I'll go into the garage gym and I'll do a little bit of weightlifting, back then it was like clean and jerk and snatch followed by some squats or pulls and stuff like that. And then later on in the day, I would do a little bit of conditioning, maybe mess around with some skill work here and there. And the conditioning was generally very, very, very high intensity, where you're maximizing your athletic potential anaerobically. And what they said was basically like, if you continue to do this, your testosterone will continue to go down and your cortisol will continue to go up. Those things are correlated. And you need to look at how you're training to maximize your potential. You need to, basically what they were saying was you need to train smarter, not harder. And I reduced the training volume of high intensity stuff starting then. And ever since then, it's just been going up and up and up and up and up. And it's kind of plateaued now that I'm around, 46 years old. It's kind of plateaued in that like mid 500s to 600 range, depending on the day. And my cortisol has gone down despite my job being more demanding. So obviously there's some correlation there. And I think monitoring your blood work, again, with your exercise program can tell you a lot about the effectiveness of your program.